waistband. Nothing to hook it to. I'll just put it on, just carry it. Before we get started, I kind of like to get an idea of the group and what your experience is. So, number one, I'd like to congratulate you on starting your GRI. It is a great way to not only get some good education, but also to build a network, a referral network throughout the state. So, first off, I'd kind of like to find out a little bit about where everybody is from. How many of you are from First Central Oklahoma, the kind of Oklahoma City metropolitan area? A lot, okay. How many of you are from the Tulsa metropolitan area? Do we have? Great, great, one. So there's your referral person for the Tulsa market. And any other markets? Northwest, where? Stillwater, great, welcome. We're glad to have you. Other markets? Norman. Okay, and you're really part of the metro. Well, you all have your own, you have your own MLS, so that's kind of what makes it a little different. You sort of do both, right? Yes. Yeah. Any other areas? Anybody from Northwest or Northeast? No, darn. Shawnee, okay, great. So that's kind of east. Wonderful, well, welcome. The other question I'd like to ask you is how many of you have been actually in the real estate business for 18 months or less? Wonderful. It used to be, I'm so glad that you're starting your GRI now. It used to be that people didn't start their GRI until they'd been in business for a while. But what a great way to start getting some best practices early on in your career. People who have been in the business for over 18 months, but less than 5 years. Okay, so another large group. Over 5 years, but less than 10. Okay. Over 10 years, but less than 20. Okay. We just want, where was another? 2. Okay. And over 20 years, but less than 30. And over 30 years, but less than 40. Mike, raise your hand.
I've been in for 40.
40 years. Mike has been in 40 years. He's very elderly. Anybody over 40 years? Okay, we're the old fogies. Can you believe that? Remember when we were the babies? We were the redheaded babies in real estate together. Oh, well, he's older than me. So. And Mike Cassidy, incidentally, is real estate commissioner. So say hi to Mike. Hi, Mike. Okay, today, the first thing I'd like for you to do is to find in your materials the copy of the Code of Ethics. It's the 2013 Code of Ethics, and I'm not sure exactly where it is in the materials. It looks like it's right behind your outline. Okay, we're going to do a quick icebreaker activity, and I think we've got about 40 plus people here, so I'm going to put you into groups of 2s and 3s, probably loosely by your tables. Maybe some will have 4. And I'm going to assign you each one article of the Code of Ethics, and I'd like you as a group to work on reading the article. Do not worry about studying all the standards of practice. We'll talk about what they are in a little bit, but just study the basic materials in the article itself, and as a group, get one person to write down a quick one-sentence description of what does that article cover. You don't need to say what the article is, just what is basically the topic. What does it cover? So let's start with this table here will be Article 1. You and these 2, Article 2. This group, these 3, Article 3. Marlene up to Sadie, Article 4. is it Tana? Tana, I'm sorry. I know you and I've met. Tana and Janelle will be Article 5. Susan down to Ashley, Article 6. Elizabeth to Sarah, Article 7. I'm gonna, pardon?
Never mind.
Okay. Patrick and Shelley, yeah, just the two of you. Article, am I 2-8? Article 8. Lisa, Brenda, and Lance, Article 9. Hope this comes out right. Steve to Elizabeth, Article 10. Debbie to Joe, Article 11. May not come out right. It's not going to come out right. Somebody's going to have to do 2. Celeste and Lisa, Article 12. And Clinton, Carrie, and Sarah, Article, what am I at, 13? 13. Okay, then who wouldn't mind doing 2 articles? Okay, we'll go back to Clinton through Sarah. 13, if you'll do 14 also. Sure. So 13 and 14. Who else wouldn't mind doing 2 articles? Okay. Sadie through Marlene do 15. Another volunteer for 2. Brenda's group do 15, 16. And 17 we'll just talk about. It's a little different than the rest of them, so we'll just talk about it as a group. Okay, talk amongst yourselves and come up with that quick description of what the article basically covers. You don't need to put in your sentence all the facts in it, just what it covers. And I'm going to try to figure out a way to hook on the antenna. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you just a short sentence, probably similar to what you've been working on. And whichever group has something that matches this, I'd like for you to raise your hand, whoever your spokesperson is. You do have to have a spokesmodel. And tell me if your article is the one that I'm talking about. So the first one I'm going to talk about is, the main purpose of it is, I have to put my glasses on so I can see it. Make only truthful and objective statements. Anybody have that article and tell me, raise your hand and then tell me which one it is. Only make truthful and objective statements. Lisa?
Well, the objective word is throwing me a little bit.
Which article?
Article 12, that realtors shall be honest and truthful in their real estate communication, and that's to include disclosing our profession, that we are working with a realtor, and not only in obtaining clients through advertising and all of our communications, but throughout the process.
Okay, and that does have at least part of that. There is one that has actually both of them. The objective part, and it's somewhere in this part of, let's see. Yeah, no, I think it's over here something. Yes, Jamie.
When serving a buyer's
Which article first?
Oh, sorry, 1?
No?
Yes.
It has a little bit, but there's one that has a lot of that. I'll give you a hint. It's Article 15. Who had Article 15?
You had Article 15.
Okay, read me your sentence.
Oh,
Your short
my
one.
short sentence?
Your short
realtors
sentence.
just make sure that the owners or the agent of the owner knows that you're a realtor if you are buying it, or if you're working with a family member, or maybe a family member.
And the very first, I need to pull mine out so I can help you get to this, but the very first part of that article says what?
Realtors shall not knowingly or recklessly make false or misleading statements about
Okay,
real estate
so it
professional.
states it in the negative. So what that statement that I said was they're going to make only truthful and objective statements about the property. What does objective mean? What's the opposite of objective? Subjective. And give me an example of a subjective statement that you might make. Let's say if you're showing a buyer a house, what could be a subjective statement? This pool is awesome. That's a good example. So it's an opinion. It's an opinion. So this Article 15 really encourages us to state things that are concrete, giving the facts and only the facts rather than opinions. And how many of you have been worked with maybe another realtor, and that realtor is constantly imposing their opinion upon one or the other of the parties of a transaction? This happens a lot. I know this never probably happens to y'all, but it happens to me a lot during figuring out condition repairs per contract. Have you ever experienced that? Where the realtor is imposing their value system upon that buyer or seller. Instead of just simply saying, here is the situation, here are some possible solutions, you still have the right as the buyer and or seller to simply say this falls outside of the contract, I'm not willing to go any farther. That is the right of the client per the OREC contract, if that's the one you're using. And instead, we're pushing with our own value system. So this article encourages you to give facts, give options, telling the parties, here's one way to solve it, here's another way to solve it. If neither one of those work, then you do have the right to move on and cancel the contract.
Are you sure you have the right article? Because this one's really specifically talking about not making false statements about other real estate professionals.
Yeah,
their businesses or their business practices.
So this you are right. But the answer is you're going to state only factual things. So if you're in a listing appointment, and I'm thinking of another article that has more to do with condition. If you're in a listing appointment and somebody says, well, we're going to interview you and another realtor, then it is not your job to say, well, that person just doesn't do a very good job. But factual things, it's okay. So you're going to be truthful and factual. Okay, next one. Let me get back to my notes here. Avoid the unauthorized practice of law. This one should be pretty easy. Okay, I think you're right. Clinton.
Once again,
Tell, which one is it?
number 12 or 13.
Right. That one was obvious. And tell us what your sentence was.
Don't break the law and don't play lawyer.
Don't play lawyer. Very important. Yeah. Okay, number 3, participate in professional standards enforcement. You must participate in professional standards enforcement. Which article is that? Should be in this area. How about Article 14? Did you all have 14? Okay. It talks about that you do have to submit. As a member of National Association, you as a member have agreed, once you join your local association or board, you've also joined the state association or board, and as a result, you've also joined national. And when you join national, you agree to abide by the Code of Ethics, and 14 says that you will submit to a professional standards hearing or grievance or whatever is covered in this. We're going to cover that process in the afternoon. Keep client funds in a separate escrow account. Which article is that?
That would be 8.
Very good. Article 8. Do you want to give us your short? I may have already given it, but your short version?
Short version, don't mess with the money.
Don't mess with the money. That money actually, the definition of a trust fund or an escrow account is what? Do I have, if I have an escrow account for my company, do I have an interest in that money?
No, it gets a trust account
Trust account, and generally between whom and whom?
between you and the client.
Between the buyer and the seller. They're the ones that have the interest in the money, not me. Now, there is in some listing contracts, there is a little statement that sort of implies that there's an interest on the part of the listing company regarding that trust account. Does anybody remember what that is? Or do you have it in your listing agreement even anymore? There were some listing agreements that stated that, and of course OREC does not author listing agreements. Their feeling is that is the industry's business, and that is a relationship between the listing realtor and the seller. And since OREC is primarily a protector of the consumer, and of course the seller is the consumer of our services, but that contract is between us, so they do not offer one. They may do that in the future, but my understanding is that's the reason they haven't offered one. In some listing agreements, there will be a clause that says in the event that the seller is awarded the earnest money through either the buyer agreeing to let the seller keep it if they wrongfully refuse to close, that a portion of that earnest money then would be retained by the listing broker for services rendered. So that kind of puts you at an interest, and at an interest of the escrow funds. The problem is when you get to an interpleader and the judge asks for, do the realtors have any interest in those funds? That clause could indicate that you do. So has anybody ever been to an interpleader action? Any brokers in the room? Yes? And you've not had to go through an interpleader? Okay. They're not fun. So that is kind of the thing that makes it a little different, that there is some interest, possible interest that the realtor may have. Receive compensation from one party only with informed consent. Article, Sarah?
7.
Article 7, very good.
And that's basically our sentence is no dual compensation without consent and disclosure.
Without consent. Yeah, this is not worded real well. It should be, you can receive compensation from both sides of a transaction as long as everybody has signed off and understands that that's what's happening. Respect exclusive relationships. Let's see, I think we ended up on this side of the room with that one. Anybody have any idea?
We think it's
16?
16, very good. Brenda, what does it say that implies that?
My sentence, I just said, cannot target another realtor's client.
Right. And I'll take just a minute on Article 16. There are some kind of misconceptions of what Article 16 implies. We are in a competitive business, and so if Brenda is going to get a listing, and the listing hasn't been signed yet, but she's going to do her presentation and talk about all the great and wonderful things she does on her listing presentation, and I come across those people, if they haven't had a contract signed yet, there is nothing in the Code of Ethics that says that I am not able to say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, as a good consumer, it's important for you to talk to a couple of people. So I'd like to have an opportunity to present my list of services and my program to you. And that's okay. Likewise, now here's where sometimes people get a little uncomfortable. If Brenda has been working with a buyer and has shown them a number of listings, and it turns out that that buyer is somebody that I've worked with in the past and we come across each other, but they don't have a written contract with Brenda. They simply have just been looking at houses with her. There is nothing in the code that there's nothing in the code that says that I can't say, well, you know, as a consumer, it's a good idea for you to meet with a couple of different brokers before you actually sign up to contract with one of them, and I'd like to have the opportunity. It is our tradition, and it happens to be my habit, of when somebody calls me, even if I know them, if they call me on a listing, one of the first things I ask is, do you have a broker that you're working with? And I may then also ask, do you have a broker that you have a written contract with? And I go even further and I say, do you, if they answer no on both of those, I may ask, well, do you have a broker that in the event you found your dream home that you would want to write the contract for you? Which is my way of finding out that Aunt Lisa, I'm going to use Lisa here as an example, Aunt Lisa is in the real estate business, and that yes, of course they're going to have Aunt Lisa write the contract. Well, I have the right to ask them if they want to sign up and work with me as a contracted relationship, but wanting to have good relationships with Brenda and Lisa, if I find that out, then my habit is to call Lisa on the phone and say, your buyers are loose. You might want to give them a ring and, you know, remind them that you all are working together, and I would encourage all of you to consider having buyer brokers agreements. How many of you have used buyer brokers? Talk about how has it benefited your clients. Ginger.
It puts us in a committed relationship with each other.
Right, committed relationships are good. So in a committed relationship, that goes both ways, doesn't it? It's not just that Ginger is going to provide all these services for the buyer, it's that the buyer is also going to provide certain things to Ginger. Like if they happen to see you in to the price and the terms of that property and that sort of thing. What are the benefits to the buyer? Mickey.
It educates your buyer on to call you, because some of them, you know, they can possibly go see a house with another realtor and realize that maybe this is either like that.
And then they're not represented, or they may not be represented, or they may not work with buyers on buyer brokerage agreements as a single party broker. Okay, that is also one of the primary reasons. I know we're going under a law change, but the law change I think you will find is not as different as we think it is. You will have the opportunity to add additional services, and if you choose to offer working for the benefit of and obeying the directions, then, which are the main differences between a transaction broker and a single party broker, then you certainly can do that. But if you have it written out exactly what you're going to provide and written out exactly what you expect of the buyer in turn, then there's not quite as many surprises for either party. So that is a good thing. So we do have the right to offer our services. We have the right to offer our services to a seller or a buyer until they enter a contract. Once they have a contracted relationship, then all bets are off, and we do not, it's called tortiously interfere with their contract, tort being the base word for contract or relationship. If Ginger has a relationship with, is it Timberly? Timberly's the buyer, Ginger is the buyer's representative in a whatever relationship, doesn't matter. She's got a contract. If I then were to call Timberly and say, you know, Ginger doesn't know what she's doing, I think you ought to just ask for a release of that contract and come to work with me, and then I'm tortiously interfering in their legal relationship. So we don't want to do that. Okay, enough on 16. Cooperate with other brokers. Yes, Kelly. Or whoever's the spokesperson, Bill, Kelly. Article 3, very good. And basically, what does it say? Very good. Cooperate with other realtors, and it's Article 3. And as we're doing this, it's kind of helpful if you want to put these, I should have told you this ahead of time, but put little notes in your copy of the articles so that if you're in a hurry and you're looking for which one talks about a certain thing, you've figured it out. Incidentally, you probably found out that these articles are divided up into 3 basic groups. So that helps to begin with, and those are actually headed at the beginning. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Disclose present or contemplated interests in the property on the realtor's part. Doesn't say that in my notes, but that's what they mean. Article 5, and actually there are a couple of places where it talks about what you're supposed to do. Tana, tell us what Article 5 says.
You're personally involved in a property. You need to disclose that. It also says, shall not undertake or provide professional services unless you disclose that you're personally involved. Like maybe you own the house yourself.
You are the owner and the listing associate. That would be one example. And just as a practical matter, what are the things that we are expected to do when that happens? Let's say Tana has a home that she owns. It's not the one she lives in, but it's an investment property that she owns. What are some of the ways she's going to disclose that to the public?
A lot of times she's putting something on the sign out front that says
Broker owner. That's the first one. Then if you advertise anything, either through the MLS service, which now is a method of advertisement, because it does go out to the public, you need to disclose there. What about in a contract between a buyer and a seller? Needs to be in the contract. And now the state law requires that you actually put your license number. So we need to put our license number in contracts when we are saying listing realtor is broker owner of the property. The term broker, by the way, will apply to any of us. It used to be, we used the signs back in the olden days, owner agent, because it was kind of short. And then when we changed and we abrogated the term agency or agent for what we do, we went into broker relationships. It got too long, so we just elected broker regardless of whether you're a provisional or a broker associate or as a sales associate or a broker. You're going to use that term. It's a quick, easy way to do it. Very good.
Is it the same with your list advertising rental property that you might own?
Yes. Anything that you own. Yes, that is a good question, Joe. I'm glad you brought that up. So Joe owns a few rent houses, and he puts a sign up, and and he puts on his sign that call Joe for information on the property, and he really needs to put the rider that says broker owner on that. And same thing in the lease. And incidentally, where this, it's easier for Joe to remember that when he's managing the property himself. But if you're hiring somebody to manage the property for you, which is what I've done now, I have to periodically remind my management company that they need to do the same. Even though they are handling the lease on it, I need to notify the tenants that it is a broker who owns the property to give proper notification. Now, how many of you have heard the term line of sanguinity? Line of sanguinity. That's the long, complicated word for relatives. So if you are related to somebody in the first degree of line of sanguinity, which is mother, father, brother, sister, it's just straight down the primary birth family or relational family, then you need to disclose that also. Broker is the mother of the seller. Now, that is not going to be required on the sign. Can you imagine the sign for that? But you do need to make sure that that finds its way into the knowledge of the buyer and onto the contract, just to avoid any kind of appearance of not fair play. Why do you think those requirements on us are so great? the law sees us as having an advantage over the public by virtue of having a license. And so in order to level the playing field, the law feels that the public needs to know that it's kind of like going to an amateur boxing match and finding out that you're boxing with a pro. That's not a level playing field. So same thing is true for the public needs to know that if they are negotiating on something that we have an interest in or a family member does, that we are well armed and are at a better place to get the best transaction for ourselves. That is what the law believes. That may or may not be true, but that is what the law believes. So that is the reason for the notification. Now, the question, yes? Dennis. Pardon? That relationship. That was what I was just getting ready to say.
Third cousin.
Yes, people always ask me, well, what if it's my third cousin or my cousin or whatever? Here's my answer on that. If that comes to your mind, you're always going to be better off just simply disclosing it. If the question comes to my mind, well, should I disclose it because it's my mother's ex-husband who was never my father, you know, something like that. Well, if you have that question, what harm is it going to do to say, hey, by the way, this is my mother's ex-husband who was never my stepfather, or I didn't see him as that. I was 32 when they got married or something. You know, it's the same thing is true with any kind of disclosure. If a seller asks me, well, should we disclose that we replaced all the toilets 5 years ago, then my answer is going to be, yeah. If it comes up in your mind, go ahead and disclose it. Angie.
Is this only when we're listing it or will?
Anything.
Or just anytime? So
Anytime.
like,
Anytime you're involved in the
I'm
transaction.
involved,
So whether you're a buyer, if Dennis is going to buy something that you're a member of the public, let's just pretend like. And maybe it's my listing. So Angie has her house listed with me and Dennis decides that's a perfect house for him. Then he's still going to disclose. Or if he's working with his third cousin and it's come to his mind, should I disclose, then I'm going to say, better safe than sorry. So, great. Okay, next one is treat all parties honestly. It's very early in the one. Very good. Jamie, what does it say there? It says that. Treat all parties honestly. So regardless of for whom you are providing services and how you're providing services, you are going to treat them honestly. Arbitrate contractual disputes. Okay, I'm going to answer this because I told you that we weren't going to cover 17. Article 17 is a very detailed, lengthy article all about how arbitration is done. And if you all choose, I'm going to plant a little seed for this afternoon. You're going to have an opportunity to actually hold a hearing for either professional standards or for an arbitration hearing. And if you decide you want to do an arbitration hearing, you're going to learn a whole lot about all those rules. If you decide you want to do an ethics professional standards hearing, you're going to learn a whole lot more about that. Either way, it's going to be fun. And if you have any acting ability, you might start thinking about that now because we will need actors. Equal professional services for all. Who had that one? It's kind of in the middle. There you go. Okay. Steve, tell us what that says.
Basically, realtors cannot discriminate or any of these in any category basically dealing with humanity. Treat everybody fairly.
Right. Okay. Make your true position known when presenting offers. This kind of goes back to the same thing we were talking about that Dennis and I were talking about. But which article goes farther into that? It's early on. Yes? 4. Great. And that goes into more detail about having ownership. Sometimes people will ask me about, again, the question about how much ownership, and in some parts of, ancillary parts of our businesses, you know from working with lenders that if they own more than a certain percentage, then they have to disclose it, and I believe that's 10%. But the question again is, if you own some, you're probably better off just simply disclosing it than wondering whether your percentage is enough to disclose or not. I think just do it. Be competent in your field of practice. 11. Very good. So, if Joe, what do you specialize in?
I'm not a real estate professional.
Oh, you're not. Okay.
I'm just licensed. This is an academic exercise.
Oh, okay. You're licensed and you're getting your continuing ed. Okay. Do we have anybody here who specializes in either farm or land or commercial, anything like that? Okay, here, my recommendation is, you obviously are licensed by the state of Oklahoma to handle any transaction that is covered by your license. So that's any kind of real property sales. Incidentally, your license does not license you, and nor is it actually required, to sell businesses. Every once in a while, we end up selling a little building and the beauty shop that goes with it. You know, we've got the business and the real estate together. But what this article says is that, let's just pretend like Joe is a farm of land. If I've got a client, I can certainly list that property, but I am going to call Joe and say, I need a mentor in this transaction. Would you be willing to work with me on it? And could we perhaps co-list it? Or could I pay you a hefty referral fee or something like that? And that's how I'm going to make sure that I know what I'm doing. I'm losing this thing. Another example is commercial. One of the things that I have made a requirement for any of my associates, I am no longer incidentally the managing broker or owner of the company, but when I was, if somebody wanted to do commercial, more than, say, just investment property like duplexes or fourplexes or something like that. If they were going to sell an office building or anything that was, or an apartment complex or anything that had any kind of complexity to it, I would ask them to at least take the very first of the CCIM classes. Anybody here taken any CCIM classes? They are wonderful, aren't they? Which ones have you taken?
It was more on, it was maybe 4 years ago, it was a Tulsa, but it was more on doing the math and how to find the return on investment.
So that was the, I think that is the very first one. And that is probably, I would recommend that highly, even if you are selling, is this coming through on the mic? I lost it, didn't I?
Not real loud.
Can you hear me okay? I'll fix it here when we take a break. Can you hear? Okay. This is obviously not going to, it doesn't like me. That CCIM class, and actually there are some CRS classes that will teach you how to do cash on cash, which is the basic one, return on investment, ROI, cap rates. You probably learned that in that class since it was a CCIM. I recommend that even if you are selling residential single family or duplexes or anything, it gives you a good foundation to be able to advise that investor much better. This really isn't working, so I might as well just not worry about it, right? Okay. I'm going to have to put my glasses on. I got contacts and now I can't read. Make your true position known when presenting offers. Oh, we already did that. Be confident in your field. Get transactional details in writing. In other words, if there's an agreement for a buyer brokerage agreement or a listing or a contract.
9.
Okay, which one is it?
9.
9. And does it cover more than just that?
Yes.
Okay.
I just basically said everything in writing should be clear and understandable, and everyone should have a copy.
And everyone should have a copy. Boy, that is really important. There was a time when I was on the chairman of a panel, of a professional standards panel, and that actually was the complaint, that the buyer had never received all the copies in writing. And in this particular case, the realtor was able to prove that, yes, indeed, they had transmitted electronic copies of every document every time along the way, and they had good records to show it. And the buyer was just simply saying, well, he didn't have them, and he didn't know why he didn't have them. So the preponderance of the evidence in that particular case proved that the realtor had actually transmitted all of them. So just a little reminder, since we are doing so much electronically, that you do something so that you get a response. Now, a read receipt, you know, I have a pet peeve, and it's people who send me a read receipt every single email, and I just put no on it. But if you do something like, I'm sending Mickey a copy of her listing agreement the next morning after doing the listing. You know, back in the olden days, those of you who were around like Mike, we did NCR paper. We had 6 copies of everything. And of course you couldn't read any copy after the second one, but we had them. Now we have a habit of taking 1 copy to the listing, and then we scan it and store it or turn it into our office, and so it's important to send it to them. Just put a little comment on it, say, here's your copy of your listing packet, please let me know that you've received it. Save that, and now you've got confirmation in a real friendly way. How many of you are doing electronic signatures and everything without paper? Great, put your hands up really high. These are the people who are going to teach you how to do it during the cocktail hour today. How's that? Disclose pertinent facts. Early article. 2. Very good. And that is disclose what you know about the property. Disclose financial benefits from recommending products or services. So you recommend that the sellers consider signing up for and offering a home service agreement. Which one is that? 6. Very good. And does it cover anything else, or primarily? Primarily that. Interesting thing going on regarding that. For how many of you were aware that there was a big kind of controversy about unearned, notice my air quotes, unearned fees with the RESPA about 4 years ago? Anybody remember hearing about that? After that happened, what was kind of determined was that if you weren't doing any work, if you were simply recommending it, then that was an unearned fee if you were receiving a small remuneration for having done the work. One of the companies elected to do some research, and they came up with, with collecting information about the appliances in the property and about the property, and it was determined by their company that they could mitigate their claims by being more prepared, knowing that 52% of all the heat and air conditioning units that they had in a certain region were, I'm just going to pick a brand, I'm not advertising it, were Trane. And if they knew that, then they were able, because they buy in large lots, they would be able then to replace with like-kind material in the event that they blew up in the middle of 107-degree Oklahoma summer. They would be able to replace that real quickly because they had it. So there was some value to them. So they determined that it was worth so many dollars for us to gather that information, put it into a computer base. That was argued both ways by some companies felt like, well, that's disingenuous, and we think that it's still a RESPA violation, so we're not going to do it. And the other one was doing it, and then there was the home service agreements wars. Does anybody remember hearing about this? Yeah. Well, now, then we went into the consumer, shoot, what's the czar? I want to say Robert, it starts with a C. Consumer, and it has primarily to do with loans. financial. So RESPA and the Department of HUD is no longer really overseeing that. So there was an article that came out that said RESPA has determined now that that isn't a violation, especially if you're doing some work. But at the same time, the end of the article said all of that incidentally is being turned over to the Consumer Protection Agency. And so I predict that this is going to come up again. So in regards to that, just follow the lead of your broker. If your broker doesn't want you collecting any kind of fees, then that's what you need to do. If your broker feels like that's okay, then follow their lead, because there are two sides to that issue. The main thing, though, that the Code of Ethics says is that it needs to be in writing, so that the parties know. Now, in the OREC contract, is anybody using anything other than the OREC base contract for their? Nobody. Okay, that helps me. So I know when I refer to it, you know what I'm talking about. There is a little clause that says that there is a possibility that the broker may receive a fee. So you have gotten in writing their permission, but I think it's really important that you not slough over that part of the contract when you do your verbal kind of going through each clause on the contract. Make sure that you make a point of reminding them that that may happen, so that it's not an unknown or doesn't bite you later. Paint a true picture in advertising. Article 12, right, and that's all about advertising. And I think Article 12 is the one, the Code of Ethics in general is deemed to be higher level of requirement than state and federal laws, except in one area, and I need your help to find it in there. There's a clause in there, and it was amended in, I think, 2011, so if you look at your amendment times, and it's in Article 12, and it talks about thumbprints for Facebook, for social media, and that sort of thing. Can you find that in there?
Yes.
Lisa, what is it?
12.5.
12.5. So 12, and I'm going to use this as an explanation of what the standards of practice, because it is actually a standard of practice. Lisa, do you mind reading that to us?
12.5 says, realtors shall not advertise nor permit any person employed by or affiliated with them to advertise real estate services or listed property in any medium, including electronic, print, radio, television, etc., without disclosing the name of the realtor's firm in a reasonable and readily apparent manner. This standard of practice acknowledges that disclosing the name of the firm may not be practical in electronic displays of limited information, such as thumbnails, text messages, tweets, etc. Such displays are exempt from the disclosure requirements established in the standard of practice, but only when linked to a display that includes all required disclosures.
Right. So what that is saying is, per the Code of Ethics, if Kelly has put, she's gotten a brand new listing, it's great and wonderful, it's priced really well, and she knows it's going to sell, and so she knows she has a really good chance of selling it herself. So she puts it on her Facebook page, and she puts the picture of the property, and that picture is actually a link, and when you when you hit it, it goes to maybe broker reciprocity or whatever you use to get that information. After the consumer clicks on it, they see that Kelly is with what company? Metro First, and her telephone number and all of that pertinent information that is required. Okay, here's the catch. The Oklahoma law still requires that be readily readable on the picture link. You cannot depend upon the Code of Ethics that says, no, it can be on that first click and readily available there. By our law, it has to be available on that first click. So I predict that many of you are using social media or tweets, or how many of you are using Facebook or Twitter or something like that? Go into your system and make sure that when you put the picture of the property, that you are putting that pertinent information. brokerage company telephone number. Incidentally, the law in Oklahoma allows you to use your cell phone number as long as you have the company number at the same time in essentially the same size. Why do you think that law exists? That we've got to have I now am a broker associate, so I have a broker. He owns the company. He has his brokerage license on the line. The law assumes in Oklahoma that he, by osmosis, knows every single thing I'm doing. That's what the law. How many brokers in here? Again. Okay. When your associates are out doing things and you get a complaint at the Real Estate Commission, guess who gets the complaint filed against them in addition to the associate most of the time? Carrie, do you have other brokers working with you?
I actually now thought I said similar ways, but I have my own.
Okay.
So just have one.
Just one.
It's
So,
very scary.
yeah, it's very scary. She had one and she's saying it's scary. You know, imagine having 210. Sarah, do you have associates in your office? One. And she says one and it's very scary. So that person, but the legal myth is that Carrie and Sarah, when they had one associate, imagine multiplying it by 10, 20, 100, that the law says that they know and are responsible for every action that they take. So why do you think the telephone number for the company has to be in that advertisement? It encourages the public to, when they have a complaint, to do what? Call the broker. And that way the broker becomes aware of it. If that associate is not telling the broker, then at least the broker has a reasonable expectation that the public is going to call and ask for the broker. So that's the reason. And I know that it makes sense from a business standpoint for you to have your mobile number big and huge and take all those calls yourself. But remember that that's the reason. Your broker has gone out on a limb, whether they own the company or they are a managing broker that is hired by the company. They have their very livelihood at risk, and their license can be removed from them for the actions that one of the associates takes. And it is not a completely objective process. We all know that people can sue you in civil court for anything, but they can also take you to the Real Estate Commission for anything. And the broker then has to go through the process. So if there is a way for that member of the public to contact the broker and say, hey, I'm unhappy with this, then that broker is made aware that there's a possible problem. They have the chance to fix it if it is fixable. And you have an opportunity to learn that maybe something that was off your radar is a problem and you need to change the way that you're doing it. So give some credit to those brokers. Celeste?
I'm under the impression that you had the company address, you had to have one or the other, either their office number or their address, and then you had their social address.
I'm going to have to check that out. Since I'm not teaching that class right now, I don't have the code with me. So I need to check that out, and I'll give you all my email address, and if you don't mind shooting me an email to remind me to look that up, or writing me, actually an email would be better. It's Victoria Caldwell, with no dots or dashes, at REMAX, REMAX.net. So the questions that I'm not able to answer, I will take time and look those up and get an email. I'll try to get an email to OAR so they can send it to all of you all. Unfortunately, I don't remember everything. It was my understanding that you had to have, and it may be because the telephone number is the one that I like to see and ask my associates, that I didn't require that they put the address. It could be either or. So I'll check that out. It's Victoria Caldwell, and Caldwell is with an A, C-A-L-D. W-E-L-L, at remax.net. And do feel free to email me. Yeah.
It says that you can occupy.
Oh. Okay. That's another difference. Thanks for bringing that up, because there are really only a couple of areas where the Code of Ethics are different than the state law. The Code of Ethics does address the ability to offer incentives. And in a lot of parts of the country, in fact, I believe now it's all except for Oklahoma. I may be wrong on that, but for a while it was 7 states that didn't allow incentives, and I think a lot of them have changed of those 7. But in other parts of the country, you can offer an incentive to a seller, which you can do here. You can, just to make up something, if I wanted to try to get Celeste to list her house with me and I had a program where I would pay 10% of my commissions to the charity of your choice under your name, that's an incentive, and I can do that. What we can't do in the state of Oklahoma is offer incentives to buyers. And the kind of the definition of the incentive is that, let's say Debbie is a buyer and she comes to my open house. It gets fuzzy here, but she comes to my open house and I have a contest going on that if Debbie signs up with a buyer brokerage contract, I will buy her a washer and dryer. Well, I can't do that in Oklahoma because I am saying that in order for you to get the washer and dryer, you have to do a transaction with me. You have to. So we are not allowed to do that here, but that article talks about the states that they are able. There's a credit card and a financial company called USAA, primarily started out as servicing military officers. Then they opened up to all ranks in the military. Then they opened up to family members of officers next, then all ranks, then family members of all ranks. And anyway, now if you wave at a military person going down the street, that's my joke. You can join USAA. But USAA did a contract, and it's been quite a long time ago now, with Coldwell Banker. Do we have anybody with Coldwell Banker here today? And they had the buyer incentive. So what USAA would do would be if they had somebody who had indicated they needed to purchase property or sell, either one, they would refer them to Coldwell Banker. Coldwell Banker associate then would give a portion of, pay a referral fee back to USAA, who would give it back to the buyer for a rebate, essentially a rebate on their listing. And it was pretty quick after that program became available that they were notified that in the state of Oklahoma you can't do that. So they changed their website real quickly, and they had a little asterisk that said, we're allowed by law, so that they didn't breach that. But that is the problem with the Code of Ethics, is that it's the National Code of Ethics, but the law does have to take precedent if there is any difference. And that may be the only two. The thumbnail, currently, by the way, the Real Estate Commission is going to review that, just as a practical matter, understanding that it isn't completely practical to require that. But they may fall down on the side of the public saying that the public has to know. They have to know that this person is a professional. Okay. We are today I'm going to do something different from what I did before. We are going to go ahead and every hour or every 50 minutes take a 10-minute break rather than kind of grouping them. What I found is that we just never quite got enough break. And with the restroom situation like it is, I think it'll make it a little easier. You'll get your stretch your legs every hour, and so will I. And I'll get to sit down every hour. Okay, let's start talking about, and anytime you can't hear, did she put a new battery in there for me?
It's all right.
Thank you, Emma. Since I'm talking for 8 hours, I am going to try to use this. So now, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me now? Good. Okay, now, not so, let's stick this on the back of my jacket. Note to self, always wear a belt when you teach GRI. That's not very good, but it'll work. Okay, Okay, some of these things that are on the first part of this, we're going to cover in detail in the afternoon class in a very fun way. So I'm going to skip part of that for now, but you're going to know it all. There's the exercise we just did. The history of the Code of Ethics. Prior to 1900, there was no, there were almost no licensing, and there were no real laws that protected the consumer or the public. And, you know, Oklahoma is kind of a perfect example of the growth of the Code of Ethics, because we had our first land run. What a way to start a state. I mean, nobody else thought this up, but as David Barry says, and I'm not making this up, they had a race, and everybody went out and grabbed a flag and got some land. Go figure. So that happened, at what year? 1889 were the first ones, and then it continued. I can't remember how many altogether. Was it 3 or more total land runs at different times? So at that time, there was no licensing of people who handled real estate. There were no code of ethics. So what happened to the consumer? In fact, allegedly, what happened to a lot of the land in the first land runs? Within one day, it had already changed hands in a lot of cases. Now, there was the law that said you had to keep your 160 acres and grow one crop or something like that. But apparently, that did not completely happen. So there was a lot of speculation, exploitation, disorder. Caveat emptor, what is the definition, what is the translation of caveat emptor? Buyer beware, was the rule of law. And even back in '79, when I started selling real estate, even though that had not been the way for many, many years, that was kind of what was taught regarding relationships between sellers and buyers and disclosure of defects. Realtors were under a different code, but the buyers and the seller, or the sellers, were oftentimes under the impression that caveat emptor. So the National Association of Realtors formed in 1908, and it was known then as the National Association of Real Estate Exchanges. It was the first professional organization that developed a code of ethics. So they established a professional standards for contact. It was the first ethical law. It focused on service to the public and commitment to professionalism, and included at that time duties to clients and duties to other brokers. What was added later were the duties to the public, which included people who may have been served but didn't actually become a client because they didn't have a transaction. So it was the basis for the later approved license laws. So instead of the license laws coming first and the code coming after that, it was the other way around. The code came first, and license laws then took effect that were based on it. Since its inception, the code has required, from the very beginning, it required arbitration. What is the definition of arbitration? Or what does arbitration have to do with, generally? A dispute over money. Generally, it's a dispute over money. It included respect for other brokers, exclusive relationships with clients. That was a key factor from the very beginning. And cooperation amongst realtors. Real estate is one of the few industries where if Bill gets a listing and he's with XYZ company, Julie, thank you, Julie. Julie, who is with ABC company, can use Bill's company's stock and earn a commission over it. That is not as common. In the car industry, our model has kind of been adopted by them. So now I can go to whichever Nissan dealer that I want to deal with and say, well, I'm looking for that in red with white leather. And they now have a way of cooperating with each other to try to find and do trades in order to come up, but they still have to take that into stock. Business ethics, NAR Code of Ethics, and pathways to professionalisms. The ethics was developed through using a number of methods. One was industry codes, which of course when we started with didn't exist. Company policies, so each company each of your brokers may have a slightly different thing that they require of you. For example, they may have different documents in addition to the normal ones that they require that you put in your file. Have any of you worked at one firm and then gone to another firm and found out that the policy was a little different regarding documentation? So that can change. So we use those. We included individual moral values and business ethics and legal standards. Obviously, legal standards are included. Regardless of what specialty you are in, if you are a member of the National Association, you are under the Code of Ethics. So if you're a commercial broker, if you are an appraiser, if you are advisor, a real estate advisor, all of those are still under the same Code of Ethics. The preamble starts with "under all is the land." It's a very, very lofty sort of beginning. And the preamble, incidentally, cannot be used for a complaint. So anything that is in the preamble, if, let me see who I haven't picked on lately. Let's see, Lisa in the back row. If Lisa decides that I'm a dirty, rotten realtor, and she's going to make a complaint to me, and she finds something in the preamble that she thinks that I've really screwed up, that's not her basis of a complaint. It has to be one of the articles, not the preamble. But the preamble sort of sets the tone. It includes the golden rule. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. Already covered that. So the structure now includes duties to clients and customers, duties to the public. That was the part that was added after the original Code of Ethics. And duties to other realtors. Why do you think we added duties to the public? I think I sort of said it a few minutes ago. They may not be a client, yeah, but they still have the rights to being treated in an ethical manner. Interesting thing here, one of, I'm going to say almost the most common complaints that actually doesn't apply to one of the articles that we see is rude, that they felt like the realtor was rude to them, and that they talked to them sort of rudely, or they didn't return their call as quickly as they felt like they should, you know, which was -1 minute. So, but that is not, do you remember in all those articles that we went over, was there a single article that said the realtor shall never be rude to a member of the public or a client or each other? No, not talking sharply. That is a very subjective thing, but we do see complaints that come across often that say they were rude to them. Article 17 is the one that I mentioned. It is very detailed, and it goes into exactly how you do an arbitration. And it is extremely detailed about, there are things that happen with where an arbitration may be involved, that may involve 3 brokerage firms. And that's where it gets really, really complicated. Let's just say that Susan had a listing, and she showed it to Patricia's buyer. So Patricia is working with the buyer. Susan has the listing. Patricia's buyer looks at the property, and now Susan, either by her own choice or by the seller's choice, ends up allowing the listing to expire. They were the sellers from the mill, and she decides she just doesn't want to deal with it anymore. So lucky Renee gets the opportunity of taking that listing. And now Patricia's buyer calls Renee and wants to purchase the property. Renee sells it to her. Renee didn't know anything about Patricia. Renee even asked, you know, do you have a broker that you've been working with? Do you have a brokerage contract with anybody? She doesn't know. Incidentally, having a buyer brokerage contract and being procuring cause on the sale of a listing are two separate things. By having a buyer brokerage contract does not automatically entitle something. So in our argument here, we're going to even say that Patricia had a buyer brokerage agreement with those buyers as a single party broker that covered the time period where Renee ended up writing the offer. What is the shared compensation in the MLS paid for? What job is it paid for to the other realtor? I've got a lister, and we'll use our example here. Now Renee has a listing. Renee has the listing, and she's put it in the computer, and she's got X% number that she's willing to pay to the selling realtor. What is she willing to pay that to the selling realtor for? Being procuring cause. Being procuring cause. Does anybody have a definition off the top of their head of what procuring cause is? A definition of what constitutes procuring cause. What do I have to do to be the procuring cause?
I sent her an email with the property information to it. That's how she found it.
Okay, so if I showed the property, I mean, if Renee, in this example, well, let's say Patricia, who was the first one. Patricia showed the property. Patricia sent the email to the property. So those two things together make procuring cause? Okay. Oh, we're going to have so much fun this afternoon. Okay, procuring cause actually is a series of events that are set up without break that cause the prime goal. Did anybody hear me say in that definition that showing the property constitutes procuring cause? Sending the information to the realtor through the MLS is procuring cause, or those two things together. Procuring cause is not defined as any specific actions or any series of actions. It is the total gestalt, to use the overarching kind of art word. It's the total gestalt of everything that happened that caused that the prime objective, which is for the property to sell, the sellers to sell it, the buyers to buy it. So you will find out this afternoon that there can be a number of people who in their mind feel like they have the ironclad reason that they are the procuring cause. Now in our example here, Renee didn't even know about Patricia. So she sells the property, the sellers pay a commission, half of which Renee keeps for the listing work that she has done. Half of it Renee keeps for the work that she did with the buyer's side of the transaction. So she kept the whole commission. So Article 17 talks about how do you determine who is entitled when you have this situation where there's a possibility, I'm not going to say it's a probability, but I'll say it's a possibility, that Patricia may have been procuring cause. So in that hearing is going to be evidence from Patricia and evidence from Renee saying, this is everything that I did, and it is my belief that these are a series of events that were set up without a break that caused the prime objective. And Renee's going to tell us the same thing. Well, I did this, 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 and this without a break that caused the prime objective. It is a very subjective decision that is going to be made. And incidentally, just so you'll kind of get a picture of how this works, arbitration decisions by panels are based on the preponderance of the evidence. Does anybody know what the definition of preponderance is? Here's the scales of justice. Preponderance is this: slightly more evidence on one side than the other, which allows for this side may have been very close to being the actual procuring cause, but this side had one tiny amount more. slightly more, and so the award goes to the person with preponderance. In a code of ethics, a professional standards hearing, the definition is clear and convincing, which is this. So it's going to be very obvious that it was clear and convincing that the person had violated an article of the Code of Ethics. So there is a little difference. There's a lot of difference in those. So 17 is all about that. Only articles of the code can be violated. However, the complaint may be supported and interpreted by the panel and amplified by the standards of practice. One of the standards of practice Lisa read for us just a few minutes ago, and that was the one about the thumbprint, where Kelly had her Facebook and picture of the property and you clicked on it. And so if that is the complaint, that she didn't do that correctly, then that would be, the Article 12 would be where the complaint is, but the standard of practice, Lisa, was it 2 or
12.5.
12.5. Standard practice 5 would be the example, or support it. That would support the complaint or the decision. Fact situations for which each article and your standard of practice of the code are applied. So that's where you're going to see a lot of changes and amplifications, especially as it regards to electronics. Okay, it is time for our break, and I'm going to try to be as close to these as I can. I'm a few minutes late, but let us start again. One of you needs to be a good speller, so you can correct my spelling, because it's terrible. I was a military brat, and I learned how to, I missed a year of spelling, because I was constantly moving. And the other one is I need somebody to remind me where I was when I forgot where I was. So, but this time what I need today is I need somebody who kind of keep an eye on the clock. And when it gets to be 10 till 11, if you'll wave at me and go something real subtle like that. There is one that's highlighted in yellow. Can somebody find that for me? And is sort of practice 12. So what I like to do in these classes every year is make you aware of the changes over the year before, and it is an ongoing thing. There are very rarely years when we don't have the change. So would anybody like to read that standard of practice out for us so we can all hear? Who would love to do that? Lisa will do it. Great. Lisa, I'm going to go ahead and give you my mic. So here, I'll just hold it right about there.
Okay. Realtors' obligation to present a true picture in their advertising and representations to the public includes internet content posted in the URLs
they use and prohibits realtors from 1, engaging in deceptive or unauthorized framing of real estate brokerage websites, 2, manipulating, that is, presenting content developed by others, listing and other content in any way that produces a deceptive or misleading result, 3, deceptively using meta tags, keywords, and other devices/methods to direct, drive, or divert internet traffic. Or 4, presenting content developed by others without either attribution or without permission or to otherwise mislead consumers.
Very good. So you can see why this document has to be a living document. We didn't even dream of anything like that even maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago for sure. And now we need to be careful. So one of the big items in there is framing. How many of you have websites that have a form of reciprocity, like a reciprocity site? Do you know what a reciprocity site is? Anybody know what that is? Well, I think possibly a lot of you have them. Reciprocity is when I have, my company first has their website, and then I as an individual have the rights to show that website. And on that website, Bill is able to go in and look for any property in the Oklahoma City Metropolitan Association. I'm going to give you kind of a quick list of questions, and you may hear these questions again at some point, so pay attention. What sets realtors apart regarding ethics from other licensees who are not a member of the National Association of Realtors? What have we been talking about all morning? Code of ethics. Very good. That list of things that I said that are kind of the subjective courtesies that we give to each other, do you remember what that was called? Started with pathways to professionalism, and it is an official document, but it's just ways of translating the Code of Ethics into a list of subjective courtesies that we try to give each other. If you have to solve a dispute with any parties, whether it be buyer and seller or seller and realtor, after ombudsman, just simply trying to solve the problem maybe through your brokers, what is the most preferred way, and it would be the next way, to solve that problem? Mediation. Mediation, very good. Does an ombudsman decide who's going to get paid a commission? No. Who does that? How do you do that? Besides agreement between the parties? Arbitration. Very good. Before a complaint or an arbitration is heard by an arbitration panel or a professional standards panel, who hears it first? Grievance. And what is their job? What is their only job? No, not to determine if a violation has occurred. That is the job of the panel. Possible. Yes. And a good way that I use to remember is if everything on the complaint is absolutely true on its face, is there a possible violation of the Code of Ethics? So that's your question. Now the grievance committee, in the event that they are looking at a possible arbitration, we haven't covered this yet, but their job is to determine if this is an arbitrable claim. So they don't have to determine any information about who was the procuring cause or who thinks there was. It's just, is it an arbitrable complaint? So that's pretty simple. Does it have to do with money? And is it between these parties plus possibly some others? So if it is, then it's arbitrable, goes on. Okay, let's cover some authorized discipline. These are in the order. This is after a Code of Ethics hearing has been held, professional standards hearing. Letter of warning. We could say that, Victoria, you better shape up because you really screwed up. That would be the first thing. A letter of reprimand, that would be that same letter, only a little more harshly worded. Education, that would be requiring me to get some education. If it's a Code of Ethics violation, they may want me to take some Code of Ethics training. And instantly, that would be above and beyond what is required to maintain my license. So if the state requires, which they do, ethics training, professional standards training, then this education would be above and beyond what the state would require. A fine not to exceed $5,000. Probation of a year or less. That's probation as a member of the association. Now, when you start doing any of these disciplines from this point down, it is important to get some good legal advice as the association. Why do you think it's important to do that? Do you see probation for a year or less, suspension of not less than 30 days, especially starting with suspension? What does suspension, expulsion, suspension from MLS privileges do to my ability to earn an income? It stops it. And probation kind of interferes with it a little bit. So those are pretty hefty disciplines. So you can get declaratory relief through the court system. So let's say you all are the association, you've affirmed the decision of the hearing panel with this discipline. and let's say we're doing these last two items. We're expelling them from membership, and we're suspending their or we're terminating their MLS privileges. As the association, you will want to have your attorney go to a judge and say, we need declaratory relief. Declaratory relief is where the judge says, I see from the process that you have the right to do this based on your membership requirements and so forth. Therefore, I am relieving you of the party, the member of the association who's been expelled and terminated from MLS, coming back and suing you for damages. So now, if I got that against me, and I came back to Central Oklahoma Association of Realtors and said, you know, you caused me great damages because now I can't earn an income. By getting declaratory relief from the judge, you have protected your association from me being able to sue it. Very important. So how much of a fine can we charge? What's maximum? Okay, that's important. Which is the article that prohibits exaggeration, misrepresentation, and concealment of pertinent facts? Do you remember from your exercise? Which article?
2.
4 in this particular instance. Just remember that. The question is, which is the article that prohibits exaggeration, misrepresentation, and concealment of pertinent facts about the property or the transaction?
That's 2, I understand.
Oh, you're right, you're right. I'm sorry. These are true false questions, and I'm not looking at the key. I probably ought to look at the key. Does the code require that a realtor present a true picture in all your representations? You know, this is kind of a funny one because we now have the ability in the wintertime to make the grass look green or paint the house. I recommend you don't do that because it's not a true, accurate picture of the property. One thing that is important to know, and that is the National Association deems the broker of a firm to be responsible for working out any disputes within that firm. So, Lisa, do you have a fellow realtor here with you from your office? Patrick. Oh, yeah. Patrick and Lisa are just mad as hatters at each other, and they're threatening to file code of ethics violations on each other. The code of ethics says, no, Susan Miller, their broker, better figure that out and get that corrected. They're not going to deal with disputes between people with the same firm. Article 17 covers what type of hearing? Arbitration. It's all about arbitration. Does OREC have the Oklahoma Real Estate Commission have the responsibility of enforcing the code of ethics? No. Who has the responsibility of enforcing the code of ethics? Well, NAR doesn't actually enforce it, although they do have the ability if the state doesn't have the ability, but really it's the state and local. It's your local associations, your state and your local associations. But it's the realtor organization. It's not, you know, it's real easy to get those two organizations all mixed up. And I've even seen people go to OREC when they thought they were coming to a hearing for a code of ethics complaint. Oklahoma Real Estate Commission hears complaints that are filed against a realtor only that are a violation of the state code or license code and the state the code rules and regulations and that's in that little book that you get every year, or you can if you want, that has all the license changes in it. So that's strictly Oklahoma law and rules and regulations for the Real Estate Commission. We've been talking all day today about code of ethics, which is part of the National Association of Realtors, filters down through Oklahoma Association of Realtors, and then your local. Okay, so therefore, the only people who are required to fall under the Code of Ethics are people who are Realtor members. So have any of you ever had a transaction with somebody who's not a member of the association and therefore oftentimes not a member of the MLS? Has anybody ever had a transaction? I think probably a lot of you have. They are not under the Code of Ethics. So you can't complain against them. Now they could complain against you because you're a member, but you can't complain against them. Again, the article that has everything to do about arbitration is which one? 17. Very good. If the Code of Ethics is contrary to what Oklahoma state law says, which one prevails? State law. And we've kind of gone over those two areas where it does. How is the Code of Ethics changed? Can be annually. It goes through a review annually, and it's voted on first by the board of the National Association Board of Directors, and then it's voted on by the delegate body, which is everybody, all of you have a vote if you go to the convention. So unfortunately, when you go to the convention, you find that the board of directors, there really aren't as many general members that are there, but they do have 2 votes. So the meeting looks like it's repeating itself. You have everything voted on by the board of directors, and then it's ratified by the membership. What 3 groups is the Code of Ethics divided into? Public, duties to the public. It's written in your Code of Ethics. If you need that when you take the test, you know where to find it.
Clients.
Your clients and customers. Yes. Duties to the public, duties to the client, your clients and customers, and duties to other realtors. What do the standards of practice do? What do they do to an article? Help define it. They do practical application. They give examples of how it's used, and they get more detailed, like the one again that Lisa read for us of Article 12, Standard Practice 5, which has to do strictly with all the interesting things that we've discovered as part of having websites and Twitter and Facebook and all of that. I was at a meeting yesterday where one of the members said, we were talking about Twitter and getting information out, and he said, my Twitter's broke. He had to be there. We didn't actually talk about this, although the slide said it and I skipped over it. Did anybody catch what year the Code of Ethics went into effect? And it's very interesting because we're in an anniversary. What was it? 1913. So this is the year. This is the anniversary, 100th anniversary. There is a interpretations of the Code of Ethics that kind of goes into more detail about it. That's just important to know. Okay, on arbitration, we've talked about the fact that oftentimes it has to do with a commission, and so it's realtor to realtor many times. There are occasions where it could be that a member of the public and a realtor are arbitrating a dispute. And as long as that member of the public who is not obligated to agree to arbitrate is willing to arbitrate, then they would fall under that also. But they have to agree to do it. And it's kind of rare. They tend to be a little concerned that our association is going to be, just as a matter of fact, is going to be more favorable to the member, but they can do that. So it's not just limited to realtor to realtor. And who can file an ethics complaint? Anybody. But the realtor cannot file an ethics complaint against a member of the public because they're not under it. Does the Code of Ethics require that realtors respect other realtors' exclusive representation agreements, like listing agreements and buyer brokerage agreements? Yes. And was the Code of Ethics based on license law? No, it's kind of the other way around. What is procuring cause? And what is it used to determine? Brenda.
It's a series of events that leads to a primary goal.
Right. And there's the word in there without a break. Does it have to do with Code of Ethics violations? It's just about arbitration. Okay, very good. Now you're going to do great on the test, and we're going to continue to make sure we get everything covered. See where I was. Okay. So we covered the authorized discipline. The primary goal of discipline is educational. So you will find, if you ever serve on a code of an ethics professional standards hearing panel, that if the member is found in violation of the Code of Ethics, almost always there's going to be an educational component, because that is the primary goal. The goal is not to get the person out of the business. The goal is to help them become aware of how they need to function within the business. Now, if it goes on and it's constantly a problem, then that may be dealt with differently in the penalty phase. If we've seen the same person before us for the same kind of same article violation, then we may want to consider a more heightened penalty. First thing that's done is on arbitration. So the process here. The arbitration is filed. So in the example that I gave earlier, Patricia is going to file an arbitration. Let me think. She knows now that Renee had the listing because it came out in the MLS. So she's probably going to file an arbitration against Renee. And Susan, since the listing expired and it didn't result during the listing in selling the property, Patricia's probably not going to file against her because it's obvious that she had nothing to do with the contract. There are some instances where there may be 3 different brokerage firms that are involved in this. But Susan's going to file a complaint under Article 17 of the Code of Ethics for an arbitration. If there's, and it needs to have one of these components, a contractual or specific non-contractual disputes between realtors or principals arising out of their relationship as a realtor, and there's the note, clients may also arbitrate with their realtor principals. The grievance committee is going to look, is there an arbitrable issue? That's a hard word to say, you have to say it very slowly. That is it a money dispute? And typically concerning which realtor is entitled to the cooperative commission in a transaction. Remember when I said that this is where, well, what I typically say is this, I'm just using an example of there's 3% commission offered to the selling broker, and in this example there's 3% that's retained by the listing realtor. And in our example, the buyer has signed a buyer brokerage agreement where the buyer's broker is entitled to 3% of the sales price of the property that the buyer buys, regardless of what property it is. That's a case where that could equal 9% instead of 6%. And there is a little bit of a habit of saying, well, I have a contract with the buyer, so therefore, listing realtor, Renee, you have to pay me the compensation you indicated in the MLS. That is not true. What entitles the realtor, the selling realtor, to the compensation that is listed in the MLS? Those 2 words, PC, 2 PC words, procuring cause. And procuring cause may not, it may be a component of procuring cause, having a contract with the buyer, but it is not in of itself procuring cause. And a couple of other things I constantly hear when I teach these classes from some people who have been around for a long time. They'll say, well, back when we did have the threshold law, we never had the threshold law. The National Association of Realtors never, in its 100 years of Code of Ethics and arbitration hearings, ever had a threshold law. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say threshold? Tell me. Yeah, I drug my dying client through the door and showed him the property. So when you hear somebody who's been around forever, like me, say, well, back when we had the threshold law, or worse yet, you hear somebody say, well, threshold law, King's X, I win, I drug them through the door. That doesn't exist, and it never did exist. Procuring cause has always been defined the way that we've been talking about. And procuring cause, if somebody presents, if Renee has terrible records, doesn't put together a very good case, and Patricia has everything lined out, how she, without breaking her services, did this, did that, had a relationship, followed through, has documents to prove all of that. It's possible, because it's the preponderance of the evidence, as well as the believability of the evidence, it's possible that the arbitration panel may say, commission goes to Patricia. Another interesting thing about arbitration is that the panels are instructed not to split the commission. When was the opportunity for Renee and Patricia to come to an agreement on splitting that that selling commission? From a long time ago, from the time they discovered the problem all the way to getting to arbitration. So they had lots of opportunities. There is one thing that is cited in the manual, and it says if the panel determines that except for all of Patricia's work and all of Renee's work, this sale would never have come together, then they have the ability to split it. That's very, very rare. But there was a case that I saw one time where buyer was grandma. The source of money was a grandson who happened to be a professional basketball player. Lots of money, because he was with a really good team and he was really good. And he had told grandma and his sister, granddaughter, to get together, you guys go out and you find houses that grandma likes, and when you find one that grandma likes, then I will buy it. Realtor gets a buyer brokerage agreement signed by grandma and sister. Well, by grandma. Thinking grandma is the buyer. So grandma finally tells grandson, well, I found the perfect house, I just love it, it's everything I was looking for, and here's Mary Smith's contact, and she's shown it to us, she's ready to write a contract. And basketball players' financial advisor says, oh, you don't want to do that, let's go ahead and use Joe Blow, because he, and I've changed all the names, very, very unnoticeable, I can tell, to protect the innocent, but it is a true story. Joe Blow is the realtor that I like to use, so I think you ought to have him write up the contract. So Joe Blow writes up the contract. Well, who's the buyer? basketball player. He's buying it in his name. He's buying it so his grandmother can live in it. In that particular case, it never made it all the way to arbitration. They ended up settling, but in that case, it is possible, depending on the evidence that it presented, that might be a perfect example of it took Mary Smith and Joe Blow, both who had relationships with people who were, while not all principals to the transaction, they were important to the transaction to make this deal work, and they might have decided to do a split determination. But can you see how rare that might be? Okay, in every case of a hearing, the panel has to do complete due process. Due process means that everybody got their chance to share their evidence and present their information and make their case as best as they can. There was one case where it was well, I can't remember whether it was arbitration or ethics, where the broker for one of the realtors was told that she wasn't a party to the code of, I think it was a code of ethics, to the complaint, and therefore she had to sit out in the hall. Well, she did, but that was a violation of that realtor's due process, because the realtor, per the manual, has the right to have their broker present. Now, they don't have the right to have their husband there for moral support, but they do have the right to have their broker. And also because the broker is what for everything that by state law, they are responsible. It is comprised of members from an association's professional standard committee, and after the hearing, the panel decides which party is entitled to the award based on a preponderance of the evidence. So if you kind of remember the scales of justice and my little slight example and then my exaggerated one, the slight one is the preponderance, and that goes to which one? Arbitration. And the clear and convincing goes to ethics. Very good. You'll always get that right. An unpaid award typically may be judicially enforced, and we were talking, Celeste and I were talking, I think it was you and I, talking about having a mediation where there was an agreement. We're kind of jumping back to mediation, but mediation, there was an agreement, but it didn't get reduced to writing. And when a mediation agreement gets reduced to writing, it effectively is a contract now, and it is enforceable. Same thing with an arbitration. Whatever agreement is reduced to writing becomes an enforceable contract and signed by all parties. Some associations require that award monies be deposited with the association. Most of them around here don't. That money is paid directly. Are we ready for lunch? Is it here? Okay. Even though we didn't get everything covered, most of this I'm going to cover in the next class, and you did get all of what you need for passing your test. So we need to do the test real quickly. So Emma's going to pass it out. Fast, fast, hurry, hurry, do it. And then go get your box lunch.